When the extreme low temperature weather came, I was lying on the sofa, eating grilled skewers. The meat on the stove was sizzling and bursting with oil. I was comfortably sitting by the fire, sipping tea. Then I pulled my ex-boyfriend who was struggling on the verge of death and my best friend into a group chat and sent them a video. I asked them with a smile, hungry for it. I was reborn. In my previous life, I caught my boyfriend Yang Zheng having an affair with my best friend Zhong Ya. When I exposed their scheme to swindle my money and take my life, they, enraged, pushed me out of the door. What I never expected was that in September, it snowed strangely. The temperature dropped to -50 degrees overnight, and I was frozen to death right at the door. I was filled with extreme hatred. As my consciousness faded, I cursed venomously. If there was a next life, I would make sure these two scoundrels would find neither life nor death bearable. The cold that had numbed me completely was suddenly replaced by sweltering heat. Someone pushed me and said, "Xiaoli, please hurry up." I opened my eyes in surprise and found myself standing at the company's entrance. My colleague behind me was quite impatient because I was blocking the way. What? I instinctively checked my phone. It was August 13th. I was actually reborn. I had returned 20 days before I was killed. I was both shocked and overjoyed. First, I burst into laughter, then into tears. I wanted to rush back immediately and kill those two villains. But then I calmed down quickly. I remembered that sudden, strange, and terrifying snowfall before I died. This summer, the temperature was outrageously high. Everyone relied on air conditioners to survive. It wasn't until the end of August that it finally got a bit cooler. But who would have thought that just after September, I would be frozen to death? So, the most urgent thing for me now wasn't to seek revenge on those two scoundrels, but to find a way to survive that unknown duration low temperature weather first. I ignored the looks from my colleagues who thought I was crazy and went to resign from my job with my boss. Then, I returned to the house I shared with Yang Zheng and packed up all my important things. However, I didn't leave in a hurry. On my way back, I had already made up my mind. Even if I was leaving, I wouldn't make it easy for him. I found Yang Zheng's ID and downloaded a few online loan apps. I entered all of Yang Zheng's information into them. Then I cooked a sumptuous meal and waited for Yang Zheng to come home from work. As soon as Yang Zheng entered the door after work and saw me smiling sweetly and the table full of food, he was immediately surprised. I gently told him that I was planning to sell one of the houses left to me by my parents to buy the house he had his eye on as our wedding room. Yang Zheng and Zhong Ya had been plotting to persuade me to sell my parents' house and swindle my money. Seeing that I had finally agreed to sell the house, he was extremely happy and came over to kiss me. I pushed him away and said, "Let's eat. I've taken a 1-week annual leave. I have to go to the real estate agent early tomorrow morning." During dinner, I coquettishly took out my phone and asked to take a funny selfie with him. Yang Zheng usually hated me taking pictures of him, but now that he wanted to convince me to sell the house, he was naturally obedient. He blinked when I told him to and shook his head when I asked him to. Seeing that over 1 million yuan in loans had all been credited to the accounts in several apps, I uninstalled the apps and put down my phone with a smile. "Oh, I just can't take a good picture, let's stop." We both had a great time during this meal, and the atmosphere was extremely harmonious for a while. The next day after Yang Zheng went to work, I packed my belongings, picked up my cat Biashi, and left. My parents left me 2 houses before they passed away. One was in the city center and was a school district house. It had been rented out since I started living on campus in high school. The other was a small villa at the outskirts of Ning City, at the foot of Zijin Mountain. Although the location was remote and its price couldn't compare with the villas in the city, it was more than enough to exchange for a better commercial housing unit in the city. But this was my home. There was no way I was going to sell it. The house hadn't been lived in for a long time. While hiring a cleaner to clean the house, I was thinking about how to decorate it to resist that life-threatening low-temperature weather. Floor heating. Heating from the air conditioner? No, neither of them would work. With such heavy snow, the water pipes would surely freeze and break, and the electrical wires would also be snapped under the weight. Relying on floor heating or air conditioners for warmth was simply impossible. So, an air raid shelter. I suddenly jumped up and rushed straight into the basement. There was an iron door on the east wall of the basement. I grabbed the rusty door ring and gave it a hard pull. A gust of cool air hit my face. This was the place. When my dad was renovating this house, the wall of the basement adjacent to Zijin Mountain suddenly collapsed, revealing this air raid shelter built during the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression. This cave was 4 meters wide and 50 meters long. It was warm in winter and cool in summer, and the inside was also very dry, so my dad tidied it up and made it our family's storage room. In summer, our family of 3 would even come here to sleep. It was so cool and comfortable. My mom joked that this air raid shelter had saved our family a lot of electricity bills. With this constant temperature air raid shelter, what did I have to fear from high or low temperatures? I asked the cleaner to help me clean up the air raid shelter thoroughly. Then I found several workers and asked them to paint the inside with lime water. By the time I finished all this, it was already dark. Yang Zheng called, asking me affectionately about the house selling matter. After perfunctorily answering a few words, I hung up the phone. This scumbag could really act. He was full of words of missing me, yet he didn't even notice that my belongings were gone. I bet he was probably celebrating with Zhong Ya that they had finally tricked me into agreeing to sell the house. But at this moment, I didn't have the mood to deal with him. I had more important things to do. Early the next morning, I went to find someone to help me improve the ventilation openings of the air raid shelter. I clearly remembered that before I died, the snow had reached waist height, so the original ventilation holes would surely be blocked by snow. The workers just did their jobs for the money, asking no extra questions and saying little. They helped me attach long stainless steel pipes to each ventilation opening, and welded stainless steel caps on the top. This way, snow wouldn't fall into the ventilation pipes and block the air circulation. Then, I bought 2 sets of fireplaces. One was for pure heating, and the other could be used for both heating and cooking. Both had chimneys that could be extended outside, so there was no need to worry about carbon monoxide poisoning. After asking the workers to install them, I bought a large quantity of firewood and charcoal, and also a barbecue grill. When the end times came, there would be no hope for water, electricity, or gas. Only the most primitive firewood was the safest. It could be used not only for heating but also for cooking. Although the cave had a constant temperature, I wasn't sure how extremely low the temperature would get, so it was better to be prepared. Thinking that the water pipes would also freeze and crack, I simply found another worker to help me dig a well in the basement. Just like the air raid shelter, the well water also had a constant temperature. No matter how cold it was outside, it wouldn't freeze. The well drilling worker was very surprised and said that others usually dug wells in the yard. He wondered why I wanted to dig it in the basement. I had already thought up an excuse. I told him that I was developing skincare products and needed water that had never seen sunlight. The worker was actually fooled by my serious nonsense. With an admiring look on his face, he quickly finished digging the well. Next, I started stockpiling supplies. Before I died, in just one night, the snow had already reached waist height. In such a situation, it was impossible to go out. If there were no supplies at home, one would either be frozen to death or starve to death. Considering that there would be no electricity, I bought 30 boxes of candles, 20 solar rechargeable lights, 20 high-capacity power banks, 2 boxes of matches, 2 boxes of lighters, and 2 boxes of windproof lighters. I also bought 500 catties of rice, 50 catties of flour, 20 boxes of dried noodles, 20 boxes of instant noodles, and 200 boxes of water. There were all kinds of dried vegetables, chicken feet, duck necks, potato chips, beef jerky, rice noodles, rice vermicelli, beverages, coffee, and various canned foods. I stocked up on tissue paper, sanitary napkins, disposable underwear, shampoo, body wash, facial cleanser, toothpaste, toothbrushes, skincare products, and all kinds of medicines, gauze, and disinfectants that I could think of. There were down comforters of different thicknesses, down jackets of different thicknesses, hats, scarves, moisture-proof gloves, high-top waterproof and warm thick wool boots, windproof goggles, and masks. I also bought snow shovels, axes, saws and all kinds of tools and self-defense weapons that might be needed. I bought brand new beds, tables, chairs, bookshelves, and other furniture. I didn't want to change or move even a single bit of the original furniture at home. I almost neurotically forced myself to keep everything exactly as it was when my parents were alive. This way, I would feel that the car accident 3 years ago never happened. They just went out and would come back soon. Supplies kept arriving at my home. The property security guards and neighbors had seen my house being renovated and knocked down. My explanation to them was that the house had been unoccupied for a long time and needed to be renovated. So, they weren't surprised to see workers delivering goods. After all, who doesn't spend a lot of money before moving into a new house? By the time I had properly stored all these supplies, there was only a week left until the low temperature period. During this time, Yang Zheng would call me every day to ask about the house selling matter. Several times, I almost burst out laughing. I turned on the monitor I installed on the day I left, watching him pretend to be affectionate while calling me, and at the same time being affectionate with Zhong Ya in his arms. Suppressing my nausea, I put on a cutesy voice and asked Yang Zheng, "Do you love me?" Yang Zheng answered very smoothly, "Of course I do. Husband loves my big baby the most." After saying that, he kissed Zhong Ya hard on the face and then said, "Big baby, did you hear that? Husband is kissing you." As soon as he finished speaking, Zhong Ya and him burst into silent laughter. I crossed my legs and said calmly, "I heard, but I somehow feel that you're actually kissing a pig." Zhong Ya in his arms immediately jumped up, looking angry and about to flare up. Yang Zheng quickly raised his hand to signal her to be quiet, and then said to me, "Silly girl, don't call yourself a pig. Of course I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about, oh yes, have you seen Zhong Ya these 2 days?" Yang Zheng suddenly looked a bit nervous. He waved at Zhong Ya vigorously and said, "No, why would I see her?" I immediately showed a relieved look and said, "That's good, she's been borrowing money everywhere recently to pay off her brother's gambling debts. I've tried to persuade her several times, but she won't listen. When I left the other day, I saw a woman being embraced by a short and chubby man entering a hotel. She looked a lot like her, but well, I hope it's not her." Watching Yang Zheng's face change color and Zhong Ya's face show panic in the monitor, I hung up the phone with a satisfied smile. Zhong Ya and I were college classmates. Her family favored sons over daughters, and her brother was a good-for-nothing. I felt sorry for her and treated her as well as I could, even when she submitted herself to that old man called Brother Wang to help her brother pay off his gambling debts. I just felt sad for her. I never looked down on her, and I never mentioned a single word to Yang Zheng. But I treated her with all my sincerity, yet she not only stole my boyfriend but also wanted my life. In my previous life, because she was always getting inexplicably injured, I installed a monitor at home, but before I could even tell Yang Zheng about it, I caught him and Zhong Ya doing something indescribable on my bed. After that, Zhong Ya urged Yang Zheng to quickly trick me into selling the house and buying insurance. She said that if I really didn't listen, he should first marry me, and then find an opportunity to kill me. In this way, as my only heir, all my family's property would be his. My family's property consisted of 2 houses and 3 commercial shops in good locations, but it was just a well-off level, nothing really wealthy. I never imagined that just for such a small amount of property, this best friend whom I regarded as a sister would actually want my life. In my previous life, out of anger, I rushed back directly to confront them. After being exposed, those 2 scoundrels actually pushed me out. That was clearly the house I rented for the convenience of going to work. I was the master of that house. Thinking of the humiliation of being beaten and driven out by them, remembering the torture I endured before being frozen to death, and how they refused to even let me get my phone and ID back when I begged them to open the door, I was filled with hatred. On the monitor, Yang Zheng had already started to interrogate. Zhong Ya swore that she definitely hadn't gone to a hotel with anyone and insisted that I was slandering her. I watched with a smile as they argued heatedly on the monitor, wondering only how long it would take them to notice that my belongings were gone. I was even more curious about Yang Zheng's reaction when he discovered that he had incurred so many loans. It was a pity that the only thing they knew was that my parents had left me houses, but they didn't know the addresses. So, even if he found out that I had tricked him, he wouldn't be able to find me. Just thinking about the expression he would have at that time made me look forward to it very much. I turned off the monitor and went out to the vegetable market to pick up the pork and vegetables I had pre-ordered. When I got home, the aunt who helped me with the cleaning had already gathered 8 or 9 middle-aged women waiting at the door. As soon as everyone entered the door, they got busy. Some washed the vegetables, some mixed the fillings, and some kneaded the dough. The deft-handed ones started making dumplings, wontons, and frying meatballs. Food made at home was surely better than what was bought outside, whether in terms of ingredients or hygiene. I didn't want to have a stomachache because of eating unhygienic food in the apocalypse. I had already rented 5 commercial freezers specifically for storing food. When the low temperature arrived, the outdoor would be a natural ice house. Even if the power went out, I wouldn't be afraid. The aunts were surprised that I was making so many dumplings. I told them that these were going to be donated to a nursing home. While making dumplings, I chatted with the aunts. We got into a lively discussion about topics like the soaring electricity bills in Finland, where ordinary people are buying a large amount of firewood to get through the winter, and the shortage of natural gas in Germany, leaving the problem of winter heating unsolved. Finally, I became serious and said that although everything was fine in our country, considering the possibility of unexpected situations, it would be better to stock up on things like charcoal. It didn't matter if we didn't use them, having them at home would give us peace of mind. The aunts were thoroughly influenced by the anxiety I deliberately spread and nodded in agreement. That's right, it's better to be prepared. I felt a bit relieved. I hoped they would really go and buy some. When the apocalypse of extreme weather came, every life saved mattered. After the 5 freezers were filled, the long-lasting hot weather finally subsided, and people welcomed the long-awaited coolness. But I knew that this was just a small sweet treat given by death before its arrival. I started asking vegetable farmers to deliver vegetables to me, except for a small amount of leafy greens like bok choy and spinach. They were mostly Chinese cabbages, sweet potatoes, pumpkins. These were the kinds of vegetables that could be stored for a long time. I put them all deep in the air raid shelter. Finally, I hired someone to reinforce the doors and windows. Actually, I wasn't worried about security. When the low temperature came, the snow would be over waist high overnight, making it impossible to move around. I was just afraid that the doors and windows would be damaged by the pressure of the heavy snow and low temperature. If that happened, the house would be in trouble. After finishing all these preparations, there were only 2 days left until the arrival of the low temperature. Yang Zheng finally discovered that he had a large amount of loans. He called me and asked what was going on. I was lying on the sofa, slowly stroking Ba Shi, who was snoring on my lap, and lazily replied, "What loans? I don't know anything about that. All that money was transferred to your card. Are you still trying to deny it?" Yang Zheng was furious. "Xiao Li, what are you up to? Money?" I became a bit more serious in tone. "Are you talking about the 123 million yuan you transferred to me a few days ago? You finally admit it," Yang Zheng roared, then suddenly realized, "What do you mean I transferred it to you? When did I transfer it to you?" I immediately replied in a very surprised tone, "What? It was the night before I left. You said you were paying back the money you borrowed from me. I told you it wasn't urgent, but you said that even between brothers, accounts should be clear, and you should return the money you borrowed." Yang Zheng was obviously stunned. "What did you say?" I sent him a photo, a promissory note clearly stating that he had borrowed 123 million yuan in cash from me. After verification, it was to be repaid within 1 year with an interest rate of 20%. Yang Zheng exploded. "When did I borrow money from you?" I also pretended to be stunned. "What do you mean? Are you trying to renege on the debt?" Of course, Yang Zheng didn't admit it. He just kept yelling on the other end of the phone, demanding that I return the money immediately, or else he would sue me. I sneered. Since I had the guts to do this, I wasn't afraid of being sued. I had already prepared a complete chain of evidence: the promissory note, the withdrawal records of a large amount of cash, and the bank surveillance video. The promissory note was naturally forged by me, but the signature on it was his own handwriting. Don't ask, just remember that you should never write your name randomly on a blank piece of paper. The withdrawal record of the large amount of cash was even simpler. That was the car accident compensation my parents received. Before the spring festival, my uncle was having a tight time with his project funds, so I withdrew the money to pay his workers' salaries. I was a bit scared to withdraw over 1 million yuan in cash by myself, so I took Yang Zheng with me. I remembered that after the bank had counted the cash, it was Yang Zheng who carried it. The date on the promissory note was exactly that day. Even if he could survive the apocalypse, with such a complete chain of evidence, the judge would never side with him. When I had recorded enough of Yang Zheng trying to renege on the debt, I hung up the phone and went out for dinner. I still cherished the last peaceful days before the apocalypse. I ate my favorite Sichuan cuisine and bought a large bunch of flowers before strolling back. During this time, Yang Zheng kept calling and sending me text messages, hurling abuse at me. I neither blocked him nor replied. Before the apocalypse, if his attention was occupied by anger, he wouldn't notice that I had thrown out all the thick quilts and thick clothes in the rental house. That was just fine. On the last day of the doomsday countdown, I checked the ventilation openings of the air raid shelter for the last time and closed all the doors and windows. To prevent the water pipes from freezing and bursting, after taking a shower, I turned off the tap water valve and emptied the water in the pipes. Only then did I carry the quilts that had been sunned for several days into the air raid shelter and made up my bed and She's nest. I would sleep here tonight. The deep air raid shelter, when the lights were turned off, resembled a long and gloomy snake. I was actually a bit scared staying in it alone, so I used wooden boards to set up a screen, visually blocking the distant and endless darkness. Then I lay in bed watching dramas after taking a shower. My phone rang. It was Jong Ya. I didn't answer. Instead, I took out my iPad and clicked on the surveillance. Sure enough, Jong Ya was there. But the two of them clearly didn't have the sweet atmosphere of the past. Yang Zheng was furious and Jong Ya kept dialing her phone over and over again. Finally, she threw the phone down and cursed. I never thought she could be so scheming. I didn't notice a thing after all these years. After that, she scolded Yang Zheng again. How could you be so stupid? You just do whatever she tells you. Are you a pig? Yang Zheng roared in anger. Wasn't it you who always said she was easy to deceive and had no ulterior motives? Otherwise, why would I trust her so much? So, you're blaming me? Jong Ya suddenly pulled a long face. Could what she said be true? Did you really borrow that money from her? Yang Zheng shouted. How is that possible? Then what about the promissory note? How would I know? I fell asleep. Ironically, even at this moment, they still hadn't noticed that my belongings were gone. When I woke up, it was 3 o'clock in the morning. I stretched out my hand from under the quilt to feel the temperature. It was indeed much colder. I put on a thick and long cotton robe and walked out of the air raid shelter. As soon as I went out, I shivered from the cold. I ran a few steps to the first floor. The temperature on the first floor was even colder than that in the basement. Even though I wrapped the cotton robe tightly around me, I still couldn't stop shivering. I shivered and pulled open the curtain. Outside, the snow was dazzlingly white, and large clumps of snowflakes, looking like cotton balls, were falling down. It was heavy snow. The doomsday low temperature had arrived as scheduled. There was still electricity. I went back into the air raid shelter, replaced the silk quilt with a down comforter, and covered another blanket on the quilt. Being snugly wrapped in textiles gave me a strong sense of satisfaction. I picked up my iPad. On the monitor, Yang Zheng and Jong Ya had tightly wrapped all their clothes and the thin quilt they used in summer around themselves and were huddled together on the couch. The air conditioner was on for heating, but Jong Ya's teeth were still chattering. She asked with a sobbing voice, how could there not even be a thick quilt? How could this happen? Yang Zheng shook his head shiveringly. I don't know. In the past, these were all taken care of by Xiao Li. Then he suddenly froze. No, it seems that all of Xiao Li's things are gone. Goodness, they finally noticed. I was half lying in the quilt, looking at the iPad and couldn't help but laugh out loud. You'll soon find out that not only are there no quilts and thick clothes, but there's also no food. When I left, I emptied and threw away all the food ingredients in the house, leaving only beverages. Neither Yang Zheng nor Jong Ya cooked. When I wasn't around, they always ordered takeout, so they wouldn't even notice that there wasn't a single grain of rice at home. I just prayed that someone would still deliver takeout to them on such a cold day. I was laughing happily when my phone rang crazily. It was Yang Zheng. I clicked answer. Xiao Li, I don't know if he was just too angry, but Yang Zheng suddenly stuttered. All I could hear in the earphone was his heavy panting. I didn't say a word and just waited quietly. The feeling of playing with a mouse like a cat was actually so satisfying. Xiao Li, what on earth do you want to do? Yang Zheng took a deep breath and asked in a calmer tone. I replied lightly, what are you talking about? You said you were going back to sell the house, but that was actually a lie, right? You took all your things with you. You never actually intended to come back, did you? He said through gritted teeth. It might not be a lie that I wanted to sell the house, but it's true that I took my things and didn't plan to see you again. I laughed softly. Yang Zheng, you were actually hoping that I wouldn't come back, weren't you? What do you mean? Humph, if you had cared about me even a little bit, you wouldn't have only just noticed that my things are gone today, and you definitely wouldn't have forgotten that I told you I took a 1-week annual leave, but a week has long passed, and you never asked me why I hadn't come back. After saying that, I hung up the phone, turned it to silent mode, and buried my head in the pillow to go back to sleep. When I woke up again, it was already 10 in the morning. My phone was filled with insults from Yang Zheng. I just smiled and scrolled past them. I couldn't bear to block him. How could I be worthy of the torture I endured when I was frozen to death in the last life if I didn't see more of his furious state? I opened WeChat. There were a deluge of messages. A small number of people were immersed in the joy of the snow, but most were wailing that they couldn't go out to work. They were wondering how the weather in September could suddenly turn so cold overnight and how such heavy snow could fall. This was Jiangnan. But whether they were happy or wailing, no one had yet realized that this was a disaster. Probably because those who had been frozen to death last night couldn't get online anymore. I put down my phone and got up to wash up. First, I went to the kitchen on the first floor. Since the natural gas hadn't been cut off, I started a fire to cook. On such a cold day, of course, it's comfortable to have a warm bowl of noodles. I boiled water and put the noodles in, adding cold water and letting it boil 3 times. I took out a blue and white large bowl and put in a spoonful of lard, a spoonful of light soy sauce, a spoonful of vinegar, a spoonful of sesame oil, a pinch of salt, and then, as the finishing touch, a small amount of chopped garlic leaves. I fished the noodles out and added a poached egg to the noodles, then I poured in the boiling noodle soup. A bowl of fragrant and steaming spring noodles was ready. I carried the noodles to the air raid shelter. First, I poured some cat food and warm milk for Shi. Then I turned on my iPad and ate noodles while browsing the news. The noodles were just the right texture, the poached egg had a runny yolk, and paired with the fresh and savory noodle soup, I quickly finished the large bowl of noodles. My whole body felt warm. After finishing the noodles, I stretched and got up to go upstairs. While the gas and electricity were still available, I decided to use them to solve my daily needs. After all, I didn't know how long this low temperature would last, so I should save the firewood I had stocked up as much as possible. Only then did I notice that the snow had almost buried the windows. Through the gap, I could see that large clumps of snow were still falling fast and thick like raindrops. I suddenly realized that if the snow continued like this, the 2-story small building where I lived would soon be buried. Once the snow covered the ventilation openings of the air raid shelter, I would be suffocated to death in the house. I instantly broke out in a cold sweat. But the snow was still falling heavily and violently. I had no way to make it stop. The only thing I could do was to shovel the snow. I quickly put on a windproof down jacket, a thick hat, scarf, and gloves, and then opened the door on the 2nd floor leading to the terrace. I couldn't reach the ventilation openings of the air raid shelter on the mountain. Fortunately, 2 of the ventilation openings were close to the terrace. As long as I could keep these 2 ventilation openings unobstructed, I wouldn't be suffocated. I had previously changed all the entrance and exit doors to inward opening ones and bought a ladder. When I opened the door, the snow on the terrace had piled up to my chin. Fortunately, it hadn't frozen into ice and was still fluffy. Panting heavily, I spent a long time shoveling the snow on the terrace into the yard. After checking that the 2 ventilation openings were not affected, I breathed a sigh of relief. I borrowed a ladder and climbed onto the roof. To prevent the roof from being crushed by the snow, I spent a lot of money hiring someone to reinforce it with a steel frame, but even so, I still couldn't just let the snow pile up. The roof had a large area. In the sub-zero temperature, I was almost frozen stiff. My thick clothes seemed as thin as paper in the face of the low temperature. I gritted my teeth and persevered, but the snow was really heavy. Just a moment after I finished shoveling, the area I had just cleared was already covered with snow up to my ankles again. This made me feel a bit panicked. At this rate, by tomorrow afternoon at the latest, the 2nd floor would be buried. Where would I shovel the snow then? I never imagined that despite all my preparations, I had forgotten to consider that this house wasn't tall enough in the face of the raging snow. Just thinking that Yang Zheng and Zhong Ya, who might be living on the 6th floor, might not have been frozen to death yet, while I was about to be suffocated to death first, made me feel extremely angry. With great difficulty, I shoveled the snow off the roof. Then I tied 2 red silk ribbons to the air vents. This was because I was afraid that if the snow buried the house, I could find the location of the air vents through the red ribbons. After finishing all these, I finally returned to the house. I was a bit surprised to see that the electricity and gas were still on. I was really happy for Yang Zheng and Zhong Ya. With electricity, the air conditioner could still be used. They wouldn't freeze to death so quickly. The temperature in the air raid shelter was much higher than outside. I took off my down jacket, hat, and gloves and changed into loose and comfortable cotton clothes. After thinking for a while, I lit the fireplace. Actually, I could still endure the temperature in the air raid shelter, but after seeing how fierce the snow was, I had to ensure the unobstructed air vents. The chimney of the fireplace was extended through the ventilation opening and fixed 1 meter away from the ventilation opening at a bend. The heat from the fireplace would make the chimney scalding hot. When the snow encountered the heat, it would melt, and the air vent wouldn't be blocked. The firewood was dry and flammable. Soon the fire in the fireplace was burning brightly. After a while, the air raid shelter became as warm as spring. I took off my cotton clothes, made a pot of tea, and placed it on the fireplace, wearing only a thick coral fleece home clothes. I sat on the sofa in front of the fireplace and stretched out comfortably. The tea was my favorite white tea. It was fragrant but not too bitter. I poured a cup and set it aside to cool. Then I picked up my iPad and clicked on the surveillance. On the sofa, Yang Zheng's face was blue as he hurled abuse. That bitch Xiao Li. As soon as the snow stops, I'll go find her. I won't let her go. Zhong Yue was shivering and crying. Honey, I'm hungry. Yang Zheng didn't say a word. Zhong Yue cried even louder. Honey, I'm hungry. Everyone is hungry. What can I do if no one accepts the delivery order for takeout? Yang Zheng roared. Why don't you have any food here? Zhong Yue started losing her temper. All you think about is eating. The sorry state of these two scoundrels made my pent-up emotions instantly improve. I put down the iPad and picked up my phone. There were countless missed calls and messages abusing me, all from Yang Zheng. I just skipped over them. There were also several messages from Zhong Yue, all pretending to care about me and asking where I was. Goodness, she still thought I didn't know she was with Yang Zheng and was still acting. I gave them a quick glance and didn't reply. I clicked into the building group of the community. After signing the contract with the landlord, the aunt added me to the group for the convenience of me keeping track of the nucleic acid testing information in the community. The group was chatting heatedly about this heavy snow. By this time, no one cared about whether they could go to work anymore. Everyone was wailing about the water cut and the cold. So the water had already been cut off. That's why I was wondering why it was so cold, and those two idiots couldn't even think of heating some water to soak their feet. I first sent a red envelope in the group to attract everyone's attention and then kindly reminded them that this weather was really strange and no one knew how long it would last. I suggested that everyone cherish the drinking water, food, and warm clothes and quilts at home and be prepared for the worst. I reminded them to close the doors and windows. If the snow didn't stop and the temperature continued to drop, those who had no food, no drink, and no warm clothes or quilts might do anything to survive. Yang Zheng and Zhong Yue wouldn't just sit and wait to die. When they couldn't hold on any longer, they would surely ask their neighbors for help, and I wanted to cut off their way of asking for help. Actually, these reminders were a bit redundant. I still remembered that before I was frozen to death, I knocked on the doors of the neighbors across the hall and downstairs to ask for help. I wanted to borrow a thick piece of clothing or at least have someone call the police for me, but no one opened the door. But I didn't hate them. Everyone looks out for themselves in the face of great disasters. No one owes me anything. I only hated Yang Zheng and Zhong Yue, these two scoundrels. After giving the neighbors in the group a heads up, I clicked into Zhong Yue's chat window and replied, I'm at home, what about you? On the monitor of the iPad, Zhong Yue was already half frozen. It was Yang Zheng who noticed my message. He quickly handed the phone to Zhong Yue and said, Hurry, that bitch Xiao Li replied to your message. But Zhong Yue said with a sobbing voice, so what if she replied? Can she bring us food or send us clothes and quilts? Oh well, she wasn't that stupid. Yang Zheng slapped her and said, Are you stupid? Quickly ask for her home address. After the snow stops, we can go find her to get the money back. Zhong Yue then took the phone. Her fingers were clearly frozen. She typed for a long time, but I still didn't receive a single message. I turned off the light and took a photo in front of the fireplace. In the dark background, only the warm fire, the tea in front of me, and a few small snacks were visible. I sent the photo to Zhong Yue and sent a voice message in a lazy tone. Oh, I didn't expect it to snow at this time, and such heavy snow. Fortunately, I have a fireplace at home, otherwise, I would have really frozen to death. Zhong Yue's expression and movements immediately became rigid. Then she gritted her teeth and said, She's actually sitting by the fire and has something to eat. How can she live so comfortably? What right does she have? Yang Zheng was obviously also stimulated. After being stunned for a while, He urged Zhong Yue to ask for my address, but Zhong Yue called me, and I hung up. I replied to her that I was hungry and going to cook. Yang Zheng snatched the phone from her and kept calling me. I turned on the do not disturb mode on my phone and put it aside to make myself something to eat. Because I exerted a lot of effort shoveling snow in the morning, I planned to have a better lunch. I washed and chopped the thawed chicken and blanched it, then I washed and cut the potatoes and cowpeas. First, I heated the pot over high heat and then poured in some oil. When the oil started to smoke, I put the potatoes and cowpeas in and stir-fried them. After stir-frying for a while, I took them out and put the chicken pieces in. I added scallions, ginger, bay leaves, and star anise and stir-fried. Then I poured in cooking wine, light soy sauce, dark soy sauce, and vinegar. After adding water and bringing it to a boil, I carried the pot into the air raid shelter. Today, I lit the fireplace that could be used for both heating and cooking. I placed the pot on the stove and started to simmer it slowly. If it weren't for the strong cooking fumes, I would have done all the previous steps here too. This was the stewed chicken with miscellaneous vegetables that my father loved most during his lifetime, a big pot with both meat and vegetables, fragrant and steaming, and very appetizing with rice. There was also cooked rice in the rice cooker. I used wachang rice, which emitted an alluring aroma. On normal days, I would be reluctant to buy such good rice, but in the end of the world, who knows how long I could live. I should treat myself better. After about half an hour, I poked the chicken pieces with chopsticks. Since they could be easily pierced, I put the stir-fried potatoes and cowpeas in together. The purpose of stir-frying the potatoes first was to prevent them from turning into mush later. This was also taught by my father. After another 10 minutes, the potatoes and cowpeas were flavored. I carried the pot to the table, stir-fried a handful of greens, and then started to eat. But I'm a kind person. Now that I had enough to eat and drink, how could I forget about Yang Zheng and Zhong Yue? Naturally, I had to take pictures of this pot of fragrant stewed chicken with miscellaneous vegetables and show them to them. I picked up my phone and took several pictures in quick succession, especially the one with the shiny, dark red chicken drumstick placed on the distinct grains of rice, with a few fresh green vegetables on the side. I took this picture really well. You could almost smell the aroma through the screen. I generously sent them all to Zhong Yue. It's better to look at it when you can't eat it. On the monitor, Zhong Yue picked up the phone, took one look, and burst into tears. She pounded on Yang Zheng and said, "I'm almost starving to death. Why don't you think of a way quickly? What does she mean? Why did she send this to me?" Yang Zheng was busy calling the police for help. "Uncle policeman, we have no food and no thick clothes. We're almost frozen to death. Please come and save us quickly." I didn't know what was said on the other end of the line, but I could see Yang Zheng's frown getting deeper and deeper. I couldn't help but sneer. I didn't even need to guess to know that the police were powerless. Could the police fly here through this snow that was taller than a person? I really took them for supermen. Yang Zheng hung up the phone with a grimace. Zhong Yue pestered him again, constantly scolding me as a bitch and showing him the pictures on the phone, with a hideous face. "Tell me, what exactly does she mean?" Yang Zheng looked at the phone, his face gloomy, and his eyes full of resentment and venom. In the evening, I went to the second-floor terrace again to check the ventilation openings. The heavy snow was still falling rapidly. The red silk ribbons on the ventilation openings were fluttering loudly in the wind. Steam was rising from the chimney of the fireplace. It was the snowflakes melting and evaporating when they encountered the heat from the chimney opening. The snow had piled up to the second-floor windows. I could only shovel and push the snow out as much as possible to keep the terrace area clear. Fortunately, I had added long stainless steel pipes to the ventilation openings. At least they wouldn't be buried within 2 days. However, the temperature had dropped even lower. I didn't know exactly how cold it was. My phone shut down automatically when I took it outside. My teeth chattering, I rushed back to the air raid shelter and warmed myself by the fire for a long time before I felt better. Then, I noticed that I couldn't connect to the surveillance of Yang Zheng and Zhong Yue. The building group was filled with whales. The power was out. Without electricity, the air conditioner couldn't be used. For Yang Zheng and Zhong Yue, who had no thick clothes or thick quilts, this would be a hellish disaster. I should have been happy, but at this moment, I just couldn't feel glad. Among the overwhelming messages on my phone, besides cries for help, there were also a lot of tragic news about how many people had been frozen to death in this snowstorm. I saw that almost all military forces, police officers, party members, civil servants, and many volunteers had engaged in snow clearing and rescue operations. Countless power workers were also braving the sub-zero cold and risking their lives to reach the malfunction sites. They climbed onto the cold, hard, and slippery utility poles regardless of danger to salvage the power lines broken by the heavy snow. In just one day, there were already more than a dozen messages about workers missing or falling to their deaths. This made my nose sting. After experiencing that heartless scheming that would make my whole body tremble whenever I thought about it, I thought I had become as cold-hearted as iron, but unexpectedly, when I saw these heroes sacrificing their lives for the disaster relief, I couldn't hold back my tears. I realized that I was still narrow-minded. In this world, there are villains with malicious schemes, but there are also heroes who sacrifice their lives for the interests of the people. After crying, I suddenly lost interest in the fates of Yang Zheng and Zhong Ya. Compared to those heroes who were risking their lives in the snowstorm, these two despicable creatures were simply insignificant. I searched for nearby volunteer groups and applied to join. Probably because my passion had reignited, I slept extremely soundly that night. I didn't even have a dream. When I woke up, it was already 7 in the morning. The fire in the fireplace had gone out, but the temperature in the air raid shelter was still acceptable. Remembering the agreement in the volunteer group the day before, I quickly got up. After washing up with the water in the thermos flask, I went to the kitchen on the first floor. I found that the gas was still available, so I cooked myself a bowl of dumplings. They were filled with fennel and beef, my favorite. After finishing a big bowl of dumplings along with the soup, I rested for a while with my bulging belly, then I put on my down jacket, hat, and gloves and went out to work. The heavy snow had fallen steadily throughout the night and was almost covering the second-floor windows. I first shoveled the snow on the terrace and roof, and then started on the snow in the yard. According to the agreement among the volunteers, everyone should first try to clear the passages from their doorsteps outward as much as possible, and then gradually extend outward. As long as there was a way out, people could be rescued. However, as a girl, I didn't have much strength. After shoveling the snow on the terrace and roof, it took me a lot of effort to only dig a snow pit about half a meter deep in the yard. I gave up. With my ability, I could dig until the end of my days and still not reach the courtyard gate. I returned to the air raid shelter dejectedly. When I took out my phone, I saw that the other volunteers in the group were all frustrated and said that this plan wouldn't work. The snow was just too deep. The piled-up snow was like a mountain. It was impossible to dig through with just personal tools. So we were all very curious about how those power workers, military personnel, and police officers could get out. After searching for a long time, we found that some of them covered the snow surface with wooden boards, some tied wide wooden strips to their feet to imitate snowshoes, and some simply relied on a large number of people to dig hard. While sighing, we were also inspired. We decided to look for wooden boards. But all I had at home were firewood pieces. Each piece of firewood had been neatly split by the firewood seller. They couldn't be used as substitutes for wooden boards. I tried to tie the firewood pieces into a small raft-like shape and then strapped them to my shoes, but as soon as I stepped on the snow, I sank in, and the snow completely buried me. I panicked and flailed my hands and feet. Fortunately, the snow wasn't compact. After struggling for a while, I finally cleared the snow above my head and was able to breathe heavily. Thankfully, before I went out, I had tied a rope around my waist, and the other end of the rope was tied to the railing on the terrace. I grabbed the rope and desperately pulled myself to the edge of the terrace, then I untied the firewood raft and climbed up the ladder. This method didn't work either. I climbed onto the roof and looked around. The houses in the community were about 20 meters apart from each other. Among the thick snow, only the rooftops were visible, looking dull and grey like lids. I shouted at the top of my lungs, "Hey, is anyone there?" I waited for a long time, but there was no response. I felt a pang in my heart. Could it be that they couldn't withstand the low temperature and had already been frozen to death? No, that couldn't be. We still had electricity here. They could turn on the air conditioner or wrap themselves in all their thick clothes and quilts. They wouldn't freeze to death so quickly. I shouted a few more times. Finally, a voice came. Yes, someone's here. Overjoyed, I looked in the direction of the voice. I saw a small gap open in the window of Uncle Wang's house to the west of my house. Uncle Wang shouted out, "Is that Lily? What's the matter?" I took a deep breath and shouted, "Uncle Wang, are you okay?" I'm fine, Uncle Wang replied. It's so cold. Why did you go up to the roof? Hurry back inside and be careful. Facing this long-lost concern, my nose suddenly felt sour. Uncle Wang wasn't very close to my family usually, he even seemed a bit bad-tempered. Once, my mom's dog ran out secretly and pooped in front of his house. He chased after it to my doorstep and scolded for the whole afternoon. I rubbed my nose to hold back the soreness and heat in my eyes, then forced a smile and said, "It's good that you're okay, I was just asking." But then he suddenly sighed, "I'm okay, but your aunt has a fever, and there's no medicine at home." Sigh. A fever. I was immediately alarmed. Having a fever without medicine in this kind of weather was really life-threatening. Fortunately, I had some medicine. But then I was stumped. I had the medicine, but how could I give it to him? I thought this and voiced my question. Uncle Wang was obviously excited at first, but then he also fell silent. Across dozens of meters, we just stared at each other. Just as I was getting anxious, a bright idea suddenly popped into my head. I shouted to Uncle Wang to wait for me, then I ran back to the air raid shelter, picked up some medicines, regardless of whether they were useful or not, and tightly wrapped them in a bag. Then, I found my crossbow and returned to the roof. I tied the bag to the arrow shaft. Uncle Wang had already opened the window on his side. I pulled the trigger, and the arrow with the medicine on it whooshed into Uncle Wang's balcony. Uncle Wang was so happy that he cried. He shouted to me, "Lily, you've really saved your aunt's life." It was extremely cold outside. I was already frozen speechless standing in the wind and snow. I waved at him and quickly rushed back to the air raid shelter. I added a few pieces of firewood to the fireplace and sat shivering in front of the fire to warm myself. After finally recovering, I took off my thick clothes. Just as I was about to pour myself a glass of water, suddenly, everything went black in front of my eyes, and only the light from the fireplace remained. The power was out. I couldn't help but sigh. It had finally come to this. Without electricity, I didn't know if Uncle Wang and Aunt Wang could make it through. I took out the rechargeable emergency lamp and turned it on. I picked up my phone and checked the time. It was already past 2 in the afternoon. This time seemed to be like a switch that instantly triggered my stomach, and I suddenly felt extremely hungry. But at this time, I didn't have the mood to fuss over cooking, so I cooked dumplings again. This time, they were filled with leek and pork. I cooked 15 of them at once and ate them all while they were still warm. After getting full, I finally felt completely warm. Then I started to check the messages on my phone. Thank goodness, there was still network signal. Probably because there was a signal tower on Zijin Mountain. Even when I was in the air raid shelter, the signal was actually quite good. There were still many messages abusing me. Besides Yang Zheng's, there were actually Zhong Ya's. Good heavens, they weren't going to pretend anymore. Even with the power out, they were still wasting their phone battery to scold me. They really loved me. I skipped over their messages and clicked into the volunteer group. The volunteers in the group were still discussing how to cut through the difficulties and open a life-saving passage, but no matter how much we talked, we were defeated by reality. None of us had a better idea. As we chatted, some people stopped replying. Probably their phones ran out of power. Finally, I suggested that everyone give up. We should first protect ourselves and wait for government rescue. We were just too weak and alone. Our strength was as tiny as ants in the face of nature. It was better not to risk our lives in vain. Everyone fell silent. Then, a girl sent a voice message with a sobbing tone. How much longer is this snow going to last? No one answered her. Because no one knew. To save battery, I turned off the emergency lamp, picked up a book, and sat in front of the fireplace, reading by the light of the fire. Although the light of the fireplace was not as bright as electric light, it was still fairly bright. There was a thick carpet under me. I was sitting on a cloth cushion, with a small quilt covering my legs, and a sofa behind me. I couldn't have felt more comfortable. I didn't read many pages of the book, but I yawned a lot. Finally, I tossed the book aside and fell asleep. I woke up shivering from the cold. When I opened my eyes, the fire in the fireplace was almost out. I quickly threw a few more pieces of firewood in. Then I felt thirsty, so I drank some tea. After busying myself for a while, I looked at my phone and found that it was already 9 in the evening. I continued to fix something to eat, but still feeling lazy, so I heated the stewed chicken with miscellaneous ingredients from the previous night and the leftover rice on the fireplace and took a few simple bites. Just as I was eating, the small night light beside me suddenly came on. The power was back. I let out a shout and jumped up. I turned on the big light and opened Weibo. I found that there were cheers everywhere. Electricity had come back in many places. Amidst all the cheering, someone quietly said, "I wonder what price was paid behind all this electricity." This Weibo post was pushed onto the hot list in a short time. Everyone was sighing, lamenting, and praying for the safety of those who were still working hard in the blizzard and low temperature. But soon, another hot search topic rushed up. It was an official notice that clearly conveyed two pieces of information. First, the heavy snow was weakening. Second, the government would use planes to spread salt on the ground to assist with snow clearing on the ground, and asked the general public not to go out unless necessary before receiving further notice. This notice immediately caused an uproar, and everyone started cheering. The snow was going to stop. Spreading salt would make the snow melt quickly, and rescue is coming soon for everyone. A warm current surged and churned in my chest, and finally rushed up my throat to my eyes. With trembling hands, I put down my phone, covered my face, and burst into tears. I cried for being an orphan after losing my parents, for being betrayed in love and friendship and having my life plotted against, for my tragic death in the previous life, and for the cold and selfish hearts of those who ignored my cries for help before I died. I also cried because there was still sunshine and hope in this world after all. It had pulled me out of the abyss of endless bitterness, resentment, and grief. I still hated Yang Zheng and Zhong Ya, and I still wouldn't forgive all those who had harmed and bullied me, but I had enough strength to face a new life. I didn't go to bed until almost dawn that night. When I woke up, it was already 3 in the afternoon. I put on my thick down jacket and went to the terrace. Sure enough, the snow had become lighter. It changed from large clumps to small flakes. This made me very happy. When I went into the kitchen, I found that the gas had been cut off. My heart tightened again. Without gas, I wondered how Uncle Wang and his family would solve their cooking problems. I thought about asking, but since I couldn't do anything to help them in this regard, I decided to forget about it. Fortunately, there was still electricity. Back in the air raid shelter, I carried the large teapot on the fireplace to the well and started to wash up. The well water didn't freeze, but the saw pipe seemed to be frozen. When I found that the water couldn't drain, I simply poured the used water into a bucket. After finishing washing up, I carried the bucket to the second-floor terrace and poured it out with a splash. Dirty as it might be, I couldn't be bothered at a time like this. Because I was in a good mood, I decided to make something delicious. I took out semi-finished meat products, lit the charcoal brazier, placed the baking pan on it, and turned on the smoke extractor, then started to grill the meat. The meat slices quickly started to sizzle and produce oil on the baking pan. I put mushrooms in to absorb the oil. Then, I picked up my phone and added Zhong Ya and Yang Zheng to a small group. I took a picture of the sizzling grilled meat and sent it to them. Then I sent them a voice message with a smile and said, "Do you want to eat?" There was no reply from them. I didn't know if their phones were out of power or if they had been frozen to death. I hoped it was the latter. It had been 2 or 3 days since the blizzard started. They had no food, no drink, no thick clothes, and there was also a power outage. I wondered how they had managed. Thinking about it, I really felt sorry for them. I picked up a piece of grilled meat, dipped it in the prepared sauce bowl, and took a bite. The meat was tender, fresh, and juicy in the mouth. It was so delicious that I almost wanted to swallow my tongue. After eating just 2 pieces of meat, my phone suddenly rang. I looked and saw that it was Zhong Ya calling. Because I was in a good mood, this time I generously clicked the answer button and turned on the speakerphone. As soon as the call connected, there came a weak roar from the other side. "Xiao Xiao Li, what do you mean?" While turning the food on the baking pan, I replied leisurely, "I don't mean anything. I just wanted to show you the meat I'm grilling. How do you think my grilling skills are?" She was gasping for breath, but it didn't stop me from sensing her gritted teeth. "Xiao Li, where are you?" "I'm at home." "I meant where is your home?" I stopped using my chopsticks and asked in a surprised tone, "What? Are you coming? With so much snow, you won't be able to make it, right?" She panted heavily and suddenly asked, "Do you know everything?" "What do I know?" "About me?" And she didn't finish. I laughed out loud. "I don't know anything. All I know is that my grilled meat smells really good today." After saying that, I hung up the phone. I actually had nothing more to say to them. The reason I was still willing to tease them was just to find some amusement in my dull and boring solitary life. She called again, I didn't answer, so she kept sending me voice messages. There were apologies, attempts to play on our emotions, and pleas for me to save her. I thought she must have been starving and freezing, not to mention that it was impossible for me to save her. Even if I had a sudden bout of kindness and wanted to save her, I couldn't get there. I replied, instead of begging me, you'd better think about how to save yourself. Besides, aren't you and Yang Zheng deeply in love? Even if you die together, you'll still be happy, right? This statement of mine made things clear. Zhong Ya immediately became agitated and sent me a lot more voice messages. I patiently listened to 2 of them and didn't click on the rest. Then, Yang Zheng started calling and sending me messages. But all I had eyes for was the delicious food. However, since we had known each other before, I thought I couldn't be too heartless, so I took pictures of the grilled mushrooms and shrimp and sent them to them. Hehe, just like looking at plums to quench thirst, looking at delicious food can also ease hunger, right? I was really too kind. The next day, the snow finally stopped. But the temperature was even colder. I opened the terrace door, stretched my neck to check the air vent, and found that it was okay. Then I closed the door and went back into the air raid shelter. As long as it didn't snow again, I wasn't worried. Over the next few days, I stayed in the air raid shelter all the time, watching dramas, browsing my phone, playing games, reading books, chatting with people while sitting by the fire, daydreaming. I no longer paid attention to Yang Zheng and Zhong Ya's situation. There were so many wonderful things in this world, I shouldn't keep focusing on such scum. I occasionally checked the news to keep up with the situation outside. The snow clearing operation was in full swing, but because the snow was really too heavy and thick, only important areas could be cleared first, and residential areas mainly relied on themselves. However, it was extremely cold. According to the official notice, the outdoor temperature had dropped to -80 degrees Celsius. Not only could people not go out, but even military operations had come to a halt. The coldest temperature in Lungji village, the coldest place in China, was only -58 degrees Celsius. We're all made of flesh and blood, who could endure such low temperatures? Although I didn't pay attention to Yang Zheng and Zhong Ya, they came to find me. Yang Zheng sent me a selfie of himself wrapped in a quilt that looked brownish like soy sauce, and said proudly, "Bitch, do you think you can freeze me to death just by taking away all the thick quilts?" Zhong Ya sent me a photo of herself wrapped in a men's cotton-padded jacket and eating instant noodles, looking smug. "Do you think I have nothing to eat? Are you disappointed?" Oh my goodness. I was immediately surprised. Where did all this food and clothing come from? But then I immediately recognized the clothes Zhong Ya was wearing and the background she was in. It was from an old bachelor downstairs. I had seen him wear that clothes before, and the place she was in was also his home. That old bachelor had lewd looks. He had been reported to the police more than once for molesting women. He also had sticky fingers and was always taking advantage of others. Whenever someone left something outside, in the blink of an eye, it would end up in his hands. I had seen what his home was like when I went to his place to get a courier he had taken. How could such a person be willing to give Zhong Ya food when supplies were so scarce? Without thinking, I knew what Zhong Ya had given in return. I didn't say anything, I just kindly sent her a photo of grilled sori to go with her meal, and by the way, wished her and the old bachelor happiness. Then, I sent Zhong Ya's photo into the building group and tagged the old bachelor, congratulating him on becoming a groom with just a pack of instant noodles. The group exploded. Some people showed contempt, while others made jokes. Most people were sighing about how generous the old bachelor was. No one knew when the disaster would end or when the government rescue would come, and yet he was willing to give away such precious food. Some people even asked the old bachelor to exchange or sell them food. After a long while, the old bachelor finally showed up, probably realizing something. He started scolding me, saying that I had violated his privacy. I was so innocent. Zhong Ya sent me this photo herself. I was just happy for her. Was that wrong? Those who wanted to exchange or buy food from him were unhappy. They said that neighbors should help each other. He gave the food to others for free but was unwilling to help them. It was obvious that he looked down on them. Some people even questioned whether he deliberately wanted to watch them starve to death. Facing the anger of the neighbors, the old bachelor panicked and quickly said that it was just one pack of instant noodles. He gave it to Zhong because he thought she was. After Zhong finished eating, she left. I immediately said casually, Zhong has no food at home. If she and her boyfriend want to survive, they can only ask the neighbors in the building for help. I hope the men in the building can learn from the old bachelor and must really help her. As soon as I said this, the female property owners immediately started scolding, saying that if their men dared to give food to that bitch, they would chop their men into pieces. I closed the dialogue box with satisfaction and concentrated on eating my grilled fish. After this little episode, the old bachelor would surely have to consider two questions. First, at this critical time when supplies were scarce, which was more important, women or food? Second, if the neighbors found out that he had extra food, what fate awaited him? He wasn't stupid, he would surely choose to protect himself. And from now on, Zhong would become a thorn in the eyes of the female property owners. They would keep a close eye on their own men to prevent them from giving her even a single grain of rice. Zhong Yang Zheng, if you can still survive in this situation, I really take my hat off to you. The low temperature continued. 2 days later, the heavy snow started falling again. This made me very nervous. If it snowed as heavily as last time, my air vents would surely be buried sooner or later. Shoveling snow, dealing with power outages, paying attention to the weather, and following the news. All my attention was focused on these 4 things. I didn't hear any news about Zhong and Yang Zheng until 10 days later. Both of them were dead. Zhong died of cold and hunger, while Yang Zheng was beaten to death when he tried to break into a neighbor's house to rob supplies. The photos were sent to the group. I stared at the photos for a long time, stunned. Some people said that they clearly saw male neighbors secretly giving Zhong some food. Why did she still die? On the contrary, Yang Zheng seemed to be in better spirits. Could it be that Zhong loved Yang Zheng so much that she gave him all the food she managed to get? I sneered. I knew them too well. Both of them had selfish and malicious natures, and neither of them would sacrifice themselves for the other. So there could only be one truth. Yang Zheng had robbed Zhong of all her food. As I laughed, I suddenly realized that I was already in tears. I didn't know why I was crying. Perhaps it was for my sincere heart that had been given without reservation but was betrayed. No one could remember how long the sudden cold snap in the autumn of 2022 lasted. After the heavy snow finally stopped falling, the power was the first to return to normal, followed by the gas. Because it was still extremely cold, to prevent unnecessary accidents and losses caused by frozen water pipes, the tap water was still not available. The official advice was for everyone to use snow water to meet their daily water needs first. As for other needs, such as the disposal of garbage and excrement, everyone should try their best to find ways to cope on their own. The most urgently needed items were food and medicine, and the government was doing everything possible to provide support. Under extreme weather conditions, people's hearts also divided into 2 extremes. Some would kill an entire family for a bite of food, while some would sacrifice their lives so that the elderly and the weak could have something to eat. But almost everyone was no longer panicking. The snow had stopped, even though the temperature was still low and there were mountains of snow everywhere. Just as the foolish old man could move the mountains, in the face of thousands upon thousands of people, these difficulties would surely come to an end. I sat in front of the fireplace, frying small yellow croakers on the stove while humming a song, waiting for that day to come with full confidence.